You want to take your NCLEX, but you're trying to figure out whether you're ready or not. Are you ready? Yo! I'm Quite Mike, and let's talk a little bit about how you can gauge yourself about being ready for the NCLEX. Now, of course, everybody is different when they review and where they come from, what school they studied, and what's comfortable for them when they prepare. But I would like to take the time to share what I have noticed, some things that I have observed with those people who found themselves ready to take the NCLEX and who have actually passed. Again, this is nothing official, this is nothing guaranteed, but these are some things that I just have noticed that happens with those people who eventually pass. One thing that I noticed about people who were ready to take the NCLEX and passed is that their question banks were no less than 50%. Of course, ideally people want to put their averages above 60%, around 70%, and even go as high as 80%. And then of course it depends on what kind of question banks are you referring to: Hurst, Kaplan, UWorld NCLEX RN Mastery, Brilliant Nurse, whatever. Of course, they have their own different approach to how they prepare you for the NCLEX, and their types of questions may vary, and how they focus on being able to, work your mind, practice your critical thinking is different. One thing though that I've noticed across the board is that people don't get less than 50% on any of their question banks, at least for the overall performance. For me on UWorld, I had a 51% overall. And then after going over the incorrect questions, I got a 54%. I passed on 130 questions. And I didn't even finish the question bank. I used NCLEX RN Mastery and I was at a 68%, and I finished all the questions. When I was using the Lippincott Q&A book, I was going through the questions and most of my practice tests were above 50%. Now this was all towards my last attempt at the NCLEX, which I prepared for in 4 months. When I was preparing for the NCLEX my first 2 times, my scores were rather low. The first time I was using Saunders, but it was like a 2008 book, and my scores were around 50%. When I realized that it wasn't working out for me to use Saunders, on my second attempt I tried using Lippincott Q&A. I didn't use it that much, but when I actually tried using the book and going through their practice tests, I would get maybe around 50% and a little bit lower. Before I took my NCLEX the 3rd time, I started using the Lippincott again. I picked it up and my scores were a little higher. Now when I looked online, because I belong to an NCLEX RN Mastery Facebook group, those individuals who had passed the NCLEX had an overall average of around 70 to 80%, or maybe as low as 60 something percent. But those people who passed in 75 questions were probably around 70 to 80%. In the end, I concluded that if your percentage was higher in your question bank, of course you had a higher percentage of passing the NCLEX, or at least you had a more likelihood of passing the NCLEX. And along with that was, if you could get a higher percentage on your practice tests or your question banks, then you could also pass the NCLEX in fewer questions. So the least amount for the NCLEX would be 75 questions. And if you don't pass with 75 questions, it's fine. I passed in 130. I'm all good. And that's all with practice tests percentages. Another thing that I noticed was that people who ended up passing were able to utilize testing strategies. For me, I never thought that there would be such thing as test taking strategies. I mean, I saw the books and stuff, but for me, I thought, oh, test taking strategies, you could just get away with using Maslow's and ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. But there's more about testing strategies than just using those 2 tactics. I eventually learned that you had to be able to distinguish between certain key words in the question, such as first and best. First refers to the very initial action that you choose to do when you're performing a certain procedure or a certain protocol. Best refers to the kind of answer that you would give in order to subdue the problem, or at least to handle the situation if you only had one option. I initially thought that the NCLEX was all about knowledge-based questions. You either knew the stuff or you didn't know the stuff. So that was something that I always feared. But in the end, you didn't have to know everything. And what you ultimately needed to do was utilize what you knew. In the end, while I was taking my last NCLEX, there were some questions that I actually didn't know the answer to. But because I was sticking to my test taking strategies, I guess it proved fruitful. I ended up passing anyway. So don't just worry about knowledge, but also be mindful of being able to use strategies. This is an exam, and it does take a strategy for you to be able to get on the better half of those results. Next thing is managing your stress. If you can manage your stress, you're already better off than the person who can't manage their stress while taking their exam. Yes, it's common that people get excited and they may be a little bit anxious about taking their exam, thinking that, oh, this will be it. After I take this exam, I may pass. Or they may think the opposite. For me, I think the most common misconception about this exam is thinking that when you take this exam, when you pass this exam, it'll be all over. Your troubles will be all over. But in reality, your troubles will always be there. At this time, it may be troubles relate specifically to the NCLEX. But once you pass the NCLEX, there's still going to be troubles in different forms. So if you can handle your stress now, you can handle your stress then. The more you become self-aware about your situation, the better off you'll be, the more you can manage, and the less you have to worry about. Or at least the intensity once you figure out how to manage your stress. And the last indicator is you're able to compare and contrast yourself from the first day you started reviewing to the current day, or even the last day. You shouldn't exactly be comparing yourself to others when it comes to reviewing for this exam, but you should be comparing yourself to yourself. Since day one, you weren't so mindful about your review, about certain materials, certain content, certain test taking strategies, knowledge, etc. But now that it's day 30, day 60, day whenever, time has passed and you should have, or at least it's expected that you've learned something over that time that you spent reviewing. You're more mindful about what things to look out for with certain diseases and cases. You're trying to wonder how systems interact with each other in general, and then how they interact with each other when there's that certain cause of disease or disorder. I suppose it's like learning how to play baseball or softball, right? You've never picked up the sport before, but as you continue to learn to play the game, you realize that there are bases on the field, and that's how the other team scores. Now, part of winning the game is being able to cover those bases and to prevent your opponent from scoring. And once you have learned that you have bases on the field that you need to protect and to cover, you then realize that you have to worry about the outfield that the ball may be hit out to. You need people on your team to be out there and get those far balls that they hit. So you got to worry about your bases and everything else that isn't the bases. So when it comes to reviewing, you may not know where your bases are, or you may not know how they interact or how they're connected with each other. But over time you realize that these are the certain bases that you have, and these are the certain bases that you need to cover. So your certain nursing concepts may be the bases. So cardio, respite, maybe emergency nursing, or even priority and delegation. So probably by day 30 or day 60 or whatever day it is since you took your review the first day, you'll be like looking at yourself, man, I can't believe I didn't look at it like that before. Like, it's so simple, it's just, I didn't know that this is what I had to learn, or it was like this way or that way. So eventually, when you have your bases covered and your core content covered, you'll be better off, and the only thing left that you have to worry about is the rest of the field. The rest of the field may be vast, and you may not have that many players on your team in softball or baseball. But as long as you have players out there, as long as you have already that area covered in general, it's not so much that you have to worry about. You're not supposed to have every inch or centimeter of the field covered, and that's okay. And in the NCLEX, it's okay that you don't have every single content known or memorized. Just continue to do what you're doing, do content, do questions, and you should be able to look back since your first day and realize what things are more clear to you than before. You have a better handle of things than before. You have a better understanding, and you can clearly see your improvement. If you haven't seen any improvement whatsoever, I think that's very concerning. Maybe ask yourself a couple questions. Be a little more self-aware about what you may be doing wrong or what things you could be doing different. Understand why you're getting some questions wrong or what concepts you're still not handling. So yeah, these are the things that I've noticed, and I hope maybe you can notice them too, and eventually they'll help you get ready for the NCLEX and give you a better idea of what it's like to be ready. One thing is for sure though, just keep reviewing, and although you may feel confident, just keep reviewing, keep doing questions, and don't slack. Just keep reviewing, answering questions, learning, and applying. And with all that said, study well, rest best, and pray the most. Thanks for watching.